Sometimes it just takes one event, one single, shocking moment, to pull back the curtain on a problem that's been hiding in plain sight for decades. What we're diving into today is exactly that, how the assassination of a world leader ripped open a deep, painful crisis of faith, family, and freedom in Japan. All right, let's get into it.
When former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated back in 2022, the whole world saw it as a political tragedy. But inside Japan, it was so much more. It was like a volcano erupting, the violent end to a quiet 30-year crisis that forced the country to confront some really tough questions about religion, family, and where you draw the line between faith and exploitation.
So, let's talk about the shockwave from this tragedy, because it wasn't just a moment of grief. It kicked off a national conversation that had been avoided for decades, triggering a surprisingly rapid series of legal and political moves.
Just look at how fast things started moving. For years, pretty much nothing happened. But after July 2022, bam, the government launches an investigation. By late 2023, they're asking a court to dissolve the Unification Church. And by March 2025, the court actually agrees. We're expecting a final decision by early 2026. This is a lightning-fast response after decades of silence. But it all begs the question, what was the motive that lit the fuse?
Well, it turns out the assassin's motive wasn't really about Abe's politics. It was a deeply personal story of despair, a story about how his mother's huge donations to the Unification Church had completely destroyed their family. And just like that, a hidden group of people was dragged into the national spotlight, the religious second generation.
So, what does it actually mean to be part of this second generation? Well, it's a life that's often defined by a faith you never chose for yourself. And for way too many, it involves a kind of suffering that's almost totally invisible to the outside world.
Basically, we're talking about children born to parents who are already deep inside a religious group. From the moment they're born, their lives are shaped by rules and beliefs they had absolutely no say in. Their right to choose their own path is compromised from day one, and this can lead to some really serious human rights issues, all hidden under the guise of a religious upbringing. And this is where things get really dark, because these abuses are often justified by the faith itself. A beating isn't abuse, it's discipline. Being terrified of going to hell isn't psychological torment, it's spiritual guidance. Neglect happens when all the family's money goes to donations instead of a child's food or doctor's visits. And in the absolute worst cases, you see things like sexual abuse being disguised as some kind of sacred ritual inside these closed-off communities.
And these scars, they last a lifetime. The impact isn't just emotional, it's real, and you can measure it. Research shows a huge gap here. Compared to everybody else, the religious second generation has a much lower rate of graduating from university. And that's not surprising, right? Family money is gone, and sometimes higher education is actively discouraged. Because of this, so many of them feel like their social and economic status is just permanently damaged. All of this leads to the one big question that you're probably thinking right now. If it's that bad, why don't they just leave? The answer is so complicated, because the bars on this prison aren't made of steel. They're psychological, they're social, and they're economic. This quote, right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the trap. Just try to imagine being told your entire life, from your earliest memory, that if you leave the group, you'll suffer for eternity in hell, or that some terrible misfortune will find you for betraying the faith. That fear is incredibly real and completely paralyzing, even if a part of you is screaming to get out.
You see, it's a trap with multiple locks. You have the decades of psychological conditioning that create this immense fear. Then there's the social isolation. You're taught that everyone outside the group is an enemy, so you literally have no friends or family to turn to for help. Economically, you're often totally dependent, since your family has donated every last penny. So leaving means losing everything all at once: your faith, your family, your community, your money, your entire identity.
So how on earth did this system of control operate so openly for so long? The answer, unfortunately, lies in a total failure of oversight, a system where legal loopholes and political connections basically created a zone of impunity.
For years, groups like the Unification Church worked hard to build relationships with powerful politicians. Why? Because they could deliver something incredibly valuable: votes. Big, organized blocks of them. And in return, those political connections acted as a powerful seal of approval. For the followers, seeing their religious leaders standing next to elected officials just reinforced the idea that the group was legitimate and protected. It made it harder for people to leave, and it definitely discouraged authorities from looking too closely.
And this brings us to the financial engine that drives these organizations. When you hear these stories of families giving away their life savings, and you see these massive church buildings, the natural question is, okay, let's follow the money. Where's the accountability?
And when you put Japan's rules side by side with other developed countries, the difference is just staggering. In places like the US, Germany, and France, religious groups have to follow transparency rules and financial audits to keep their nonprofit status. But in Japan, donations have historically been treated as a private matter of faith. There are almost no legal limits, no requirement to report finances, and no real oversight. It's a massive blind spot in the law that has allowed for decades of potential exploitation.
So, in the wake of the 2022 tragedy, Japan has finally started to act. The government is trying to carve out a new path, but it's a path filled with legal minefields and some really big questions about whether these new measures are actually going to be enough.
Now, this court dissolution order is a huge deal, but it's really important to understand what it does and doesn't do. It does not ban anyone's personal beliefs. What it does is strip the organization of its special legal status as a religious corporation. That means it loses its tax breaks and other privileges. Then, a liquidator comes in to manage whatever assets are left, with the main goal of using that money to compensate the victims.
But, and this is a big but, the new laws aren't a silver bullet. There's a 2022 law that's supposed to stop coercive donations, which is a great first step. But it's really hard to apply it backwards to donations made years or decades ago. And a huge fear for victims right now is that the church will just move all its money and assets overseas before the process is finished, leaving nothing behind for them. So far, the government has been a little hesitant to make the law even tougher.
So, if Japan is looking for ideas, they might want to look at France. Their 2024 anti-sect law is really interesting because it doesn't target belief, it targets harmful actions. It actually created a new crime for pressuring followers to refuse medical treatment. It brought in tougher prison sentences for leaders who exploit their followers' psychological state. And maybe most importantly, it empowers advocacy groups to sue on behalf of victims who are often way too scared or isolated to do it themselves.
And this, right here, is the fundamental question Japan is wrestling with. One terrible, tragic event has forced the country to deal with a problem it ignored for 30 years. The court decisions and new laws being made right now are going to set a precedent for generations to come. The challenge is figuring out how to protect freedom of religion while, at the same time, guaranteeing that no one's basic human rights can be taken away in the name of faith.